Afternoon. I will put a disclaimer in here. I got one of the bulgy battery computers. I won't mention the vendor. And so if you see a sudden burst of burn in the screen or something like that, yeah, we're pretty much done. So I'm waiting on that. A little bit, this is about an experience that I had. It's about a maintenance that we went through. Some of the process we went through was unlearning what we had already learned. We thought we were doing a good job. If this is looking for Reg's session, that's next door, so that's not here. Thanks ISSA for having the conference and having the ability to learn this, get experiences. Hopefully you'll learn something and maybe take away the ability to sidestep a problem that you had. So this was a simple maintenance. That's all it was supposed to do. I'm just a regular sysadmin guy. I was doing my job. I thought I was doing due diligence. There's several disclaimers I'll have in here. I was doing configuration in the code before it was a thing, and I was doing GRC before it was a thing. So just so you know that up front, that I didn't have all these cool things that we have now, frameworks and certifications and stuff, to make sure I was doing the right thing. So I've supported software development. I've done systems administration since VMS 1.4. VMS? Okay, so a couple of buddies out there. I'm CRISC certified. I am looking at CISA, CISM, CISP, whatever the alphabet soup is that kind of ties this all together. I've got a BS in IT from RIT, so I've kind of been through the ringer. I was actually helping because I went back as a returning student. I was helping them develop the curriculum, which was interesting to have some of those conversations with the administrators. So what we're going to look at today is have an overview and understanding of GRC. Possibly you can pick up some DR contingency planning that's you can work with. We're working on those that govern the process as well as those that manage the governed. I'll present a scenario of simple maintenance, identify milestones that were ignored, but hopefully give you an opportunity to look empirically at what I did, make some observations, and take that back with you. The direction forward is to basically using the framework, ISACA framework COBIT. I'm not paid by ISACA. I'm an ISACA member, which is a certification organization. Does anyone, so we're going to start off. This is a question. Does anybody know what a disaster looks like? Anybody want to venture? What's a disaster look like? Yeah.
A loss of operability, loss of system.
Okay. Anybody else? Ransomware is a good one. Just before that, what does a disaster look like? This is a disaster. You ever seen one of these cumulonimbus clouds? Huge, big, maybe 10, 20,000 feet. It means heap in Latin. It's a rainstorm, or what we call storm clouds, formed from water vapor, blah, 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 that stuff. It's a cold front coming in. Typically, they're associated with lightning, cold fronts, gusts, hail, tornadoes, supercells, microbursts. I don't remember a few years ago we had a microburst on one of the streets here in Rochester. It took all the telephone poles that were along the main drag and just laid them right over like that. But this is the only place it happened. So a lot of times we're really good at identifying a disaster when we see it. The object is to try to identify it and ultimately prevent it. So in my experience, they scheduled some maintenance. Christmas time, nobody will be using the systems, won't be a lot of activity. We have support. Okay, remember that, I said we have support, okay? So the decree went out, we're gonna have replace a switch. So everybody knows what a switch is, right? Little black box, goes in the power transfer case, right? Yeah, nobody was thinking about that, were you? No. They told us it was a switch. We knew they were going to be working on the power in the main data center. Standard operating procedure, testing conditions, It's been tested and tried, done successfully for the last 12 years. No interruptions were planned or anticipated. The interruptions possible, we'll be running on straight power. So the idea was that while they're working on the battery backup system they had, they'll roll over to street power, so the only time we'll have a real problem is if the regional street power failed. Okay, that's where we're gonna have that issue. Did we do due diligence? We had inventory. All our servers were in this one area. We could go in, we could sing them, finger poke them. We'd done inventory, documented the servers, the systems, the applications, the customers. We notified our management. We had on-call, which, by the way, remember I said we had support? We had on-call, but it was offshore. Okay? So that's important. We knew that, but it was not a big deal. The DBAs are notified, middle tier, our storage, offshore support, everyone was on board. We got the okay to go ahead. Some auditing footnotes here. We thought we'd done our due diligence. Like I said, we documented the system, we documented the applications, we verified the customer's timeline to make sure stakeholders were all set, notified management, notified on-call, the maintenance, the DBAs. Everybody was on board. We had all things we needed. When is a good time to have these things, right? Before you start maintenance. Now, I didn't say where do you have them. I said the importance is what's a good time to have them, okay? So these are the guys actually doing the maintenance. And this section over here, this is a whole battery bank. Now, don't critique me on the design because we have, this is our ISP input right here, right next to the battery bank. I don't want to hear about that, okay? We knew that. There's parts were there, peoples were there. These guys had been doing this. They were familiar with our environment. They were familiar with the technology, the batteries. And this was enough. This battery bank here for the data center we had would run our data center for about 10 minutes. It would alert, then it would, the systems would start shutting down. This is 5 hours before what I'll talk through here is the 0 hour, okay? So this is 5 hours before maintenance. Getting ready. This is our server panel. See, we were remember the spaghetti that we saw in a presentation with Eugene? Okay, see, we did a good job. We were doing right. 3 hours and 1 minute before the maintenance starts, right? Whoops, 3 hours. 3 hours before the maintenance is supposed to start. This is 1.5 hours later. We got lights on. 50 servers were inaccessible. The network, we were having network problems. Obviously, our network was down. 8 hours later, so now we're like 9.5 hours into it, the Unix team was working on the servers. We had remote support, okay? Just want to make sure you understand. We had remote support. The people were in Philippines and in India, Bangladesh, Hyderabad. They were in Hyderabad. After 9 hours, so now we're minus 3 hours on the maintenance because that didn't happen. We're 9 hours into this. We discovered that the local Unix team support was required for the servers. Everybody knows what finger poke is, right? You gotta go push the button to start the computer, right? Nobody was around. We were all on vacation, all the guys that were local. We had remote support, right? We're good. They're on call. So 10 hours into this, finally we get a Unix guy on site, okay? So after 12 hours of outage, the power came back on, the data center support composition was in place, 7% of the network for site communication and the support work was on board. 42% of the Windows servers that we had in the area were being worked on, and 51% of the Unix servers. We had 297 servers in this location. So, again, now we're walking the timeline out, 10 hours. We got Unix support, 13 hours, specific requests coming in for the machines. We had people calling in and saying, what about my machine, and naming the machine, and these people were in the Philippines. It was Monday morning in the Philippines, and they're calling us wanting to know how come their system's not up. We don't have any support in the Philippines. We don't have any application support out there. Why are these people calling the Unix people and naming servers by name, not by application name, like google.com or something like that? They were actually talking about servers that we had in the data center, the real names. 13 and a half hours, our production is back online. 14 hours, the second production application was identified that we didn't know about, right? But we'd done our due diligence. We talked to them. Do you have anything that's supported in our data center that you need to worry about? No, we're all set. We're good. Still down the notice the application feature capability was unavailable. 15 hours, a third production application was identified. So here we are, 0 plus about a day, okay? Most of the Windows servers are up and running. There's no or little lag on the mitigation because we're working through stuff as fast as we can. Unix servers are coming up, required hands-on power cycling. So now it's the day, like Christmas week, and all of a sudden, all the support Unix people that are on site are back in the office. Everybody was on vacation because we had cleared it with everybody. So we were all located in. The calls were coming from offshore. Customers complaining about the servers not being available. Incident manager wanting a report on the outage and the mitigation efforts. So now somebody's been assigned to manage this. And the on-call personnel, remote, were not able to accomplish server tools, get server tools running and boots without local personnel. We hadn't structured all of our systems to be on a remote console type environment. So now what we have, we're all set. So local guys are there, we're all set. Systems have been up and running. Some of the systems had been up for like 5 years without a reboot. Is that anybody like, yeah, it's okay. Yeah? So we were power cycling some of the equipment, and the local people were in, called in from holidays. One person had to come back from a trip they were on. And we got the incident manager guy calling us, wants to know what's going on. The local Unix personnel were located. We're trying to figure out what the boot sequence is, because we boot this server. Well, this server's waiting for that one. Well, that server has to wait for this one, and that server depends on that one. And that one's not going to come up unless he's up. He's not coming up unless he's up, and he's not going to come up because he's not up. So research and development is the environment we're in. We supported them. We weren't really tied into the process, as you can probably guess, very well. And then the incident manager comes back. We're about a day and a half into this. He says, why aren't there any Unix people supporting these systems? How come we don't have any support? And so we did. Remember the decision to move the support offshore? That's our support. So that kind of, that's like put a check mark next to that. So the net effect after we had our outage, we're like 2 days into this. The Windows servers are up about 100%. Unix servers, 240 out of 248 of the systems are up. We're having some hardware issues because systems have been up for a long time. And management's asking about problems with support. We're negotiating, you know what T&M is? Time and materials. We're negotiating time and materials for 20 servers that were out of spec. They weren't supported. So we're calling the vendor saying, what can we do? We have some failed components on these. What can we do to get them going? So we thought you retired that system like 5 years ago. So we're working on that. And real time, we're amending the maintenance contract with the vendor so we can get the systems back up because people have applications that are being relied on for these. So what happened? Questions that should have been asked. We're going to go through some of those. You might have already seen some. Like one of the questions you should have asked is the guy comes up and says, we're going to do some maintenance on your power. We're going to change out a switch. You're going to say, okay, what's a switch? That would be a really good question you want to ask them. How long is it going to take? Has it happened before? What do you do if we have a power outage? Well, you won't have a power outage. Remember, they told us we'd be running on street power. Well, what happens if you really do have a power outage? What happens then? And you need to press sometimes for these answers to get information back, because that's what is going to drive your ability to analyze the risk. What about the equipment? How old's the equipment? We knew some of our equipment was old, but it had been running for 3, 4, or 5 years. It wasn't a big deal. Stuff the application, and we were all set. So the declarations that came back to us with this were, it's simple maintenance, it's never a problem, we didn't ask a lot of questions, and there was really no buzz from local staff. We were all ready to go on holiday, right? We were all ready to get out of town. So the phrase "trust me" comes into play. They didn't say trust us, but they said, we've done this before, it's not a big deal. So now what do? So we're after the disaster. We now know what it looks like, right? We've seen it. We know what it looked like before because everything was happy, and now we know what it looks like now. Not good. So we're excited about this a little bit because now we have the ability, we have everybody's undivided attention. Has anybody gone to their application supported environment and go in and say, so what stuff are you writing and put on our computers? Oh, we got a couple things like this. I really got to go. I got another meeting. Do you need anything else from me? And you're gone, right? So we had their undivided attention because the incident manager wants to know, what's this dependency here? I don't understand that. Why do we have that dependency? So we're trying to explain that. So we have the ability to talk to the enterprise real time, talk to management about ongoing issues, because we, after all, for T&M, this is like a major windfall for them. There's a drive to understand what went wrong, and there's a huge opportunity for collection of contacts, information, et cetera. Oh, by the way, this is a little deal that caused the problem. So if you saw you had your service was going to be relying on this, it's about 6 by 8 by 8, 6 inches by 8 inches by 8 inches. If you saw that they were going to replace that, how many people would ask, what's the availability? How would you even ask, how many do you have? The answer was 1. What's the availability on this? It can be sourced. This is originally 13 years old, or 13 years old with an MTBF of 10 years, okay? Right? So it's supposed to last 10 years. It's 13 now. Replacement, custom order, or we could get it on eBay. It's $500. You'd overnight it for $500. Information that we didn't really look for, but it was stuff that we needed to have to actually do a real, kind of like a risk assessment. Well, you got 1, you're going to be working on 6. What are the odds, right? So another opportunity for us to go back to them and say, you can do the work on the system if you want, but you got to have 7. You got to have 7. That would have been a good opportunity for us to go back to them and mitigate our risk, minimize our risk, because they had 1 and they were replacing 6. So who's the customer, who's the recovery time, who's the support personnel? These are all questions we should have asked. Who relies on this equipment if it goes down? We didn't know the application had been moved to the Philippines. The developers did, but they were gone. And at this time, we didn't have any rear application support. It was like the application support went to the servers. When the servers came up, the application came up. So if there was a problem with the application coming up, we were kind of stuck with figuring out how to get it going with the resources we had at hand. We didn't call the developers. Oh, that sounds like an idea, another milestone there. Who are the users of business power? Partners, how old was the equipment? How old was the switch? Replacement availability. Some of the servers were up, some we hadn't rebooted for 5 years. They had told us there was no impact locally and remotely, it wasn't that big a deal, which was actually the opposite. The maintenance was started at 10 p.m. our time, which is actually, I believe it was 10 a.m., which is where the users were, the people that use the applications. So they hadn't been notified. So here we are. What about our customers? They're looking at this saying, you guys are lax, you're not being able to support us properly. And we're saying, what do we do with all this information? This was literally like 5 of us sitting in a conference room looking at each other like crap, what just happened? But I have people looking at this. The process is all over the proverbial floor, right? Pieces of the enterprise and computing policy, procedure, and process are everywhere. All of our documentation was, where do you think that was? Because we were efficient in documenting our environment. Where do you think it all was? Online. Whoops. We didn't have any resources. Our systems were down. So we're doing all this blind legacy from memory, which systems are what, and which was only partial because we hadn't known about some of the stuff that had been moved offshore. So now we're collecting information, and I start looking at this thing called a framework on how to organize your information. Governance and management of IT. So this is a while back. To me at the time it smelled like ITIL. Is everybody familiar with ITIL? ITIL, right? That's organized for process, really. Okay? For services to customers. We were looking at this right here, right? Because we want to have the environment set up. We need to govern and manage the environment, and we need to actually manage it. We thought we were managing it, but it was very passive in the way we were working with it. ITIL is good. It's a framework focused on service. It's much more than a source of ideas and options. It gives you a structure. ITIL is much larger user base with working on services because everything is service-based now, right? That's where they want to make sure that customers have access to their information, the data that they're paying for, and they don't really worry too much about this on the back side. So if you don't take anything else away from the talk today, there's 2 diagrams. This is one of them. This is a COBIT 5 principles that are best governance and management. Structure for framing any IT management thinking, okay? And to assess or audit a checklist from any form of a review, process capability, current state review, document audit processes, and descriptions of practices and their deliverables in an input rule descriptions, especially with RACI, responsibility matrices, management and governance mechanisms. So how are we going to do this? Not just that it has to be done, but how are you going to do this? Okay? So my approach has been, I listen to people talk about coming up through the IT realm, and I've had the benefit of working with people that wanted to do it right. It wasn't just to like get it done and move on. It was like they were very process oriented in some of the projects I worked on. So I had the benefit of learning this kind of as it came along. So when I saw this, it was like, oh yeah, I get that. Somebody drew some pretty pictures about it, okay? So I have a very holistic approach towards the systems management and engineering. You don't just design a computer and put it out there and let people have it, because I know historically that computer talks to that computer, and that one talks to that one, and that one talks to that one, and that one talks to storage, and everybody's talking to everybody else. And you need to understand how the conversations work. I hope everybody saw Eugene Spafford's talk this morning, the keynote, okay? It's everything together. It's understanding the people that are using it. You don't have to get inside their head, but you have to understand how they're working and how they're using the information and the applications. So COBIT 5 is, you'll find it on ISACA website. It's kind of proprietary because it's set aside differently, but it's set aside developed by ISACA. I'm not here to sell it by ISACA. I'm here to tell you, you need to have the ability to manage manage your environment through a process, okay? So the COVID enablers, this is the big one. This is where everything hangs off of this. Principles, policies, and frameworks. How are you gonna put your stuff together? And then these 6 hang off of that. This is the other diagram that you need to look at, that you need to understand. Here's your principles, policies, and frameworks here, and then you have your process, your organizational structures, and your culture, ethics, and behavior. How are you gonna engage these? You're talking to your customers. What do they have for the system? How are they managing their applications? How are they organizing it? Do I need to help them organize it so I don't have some kind of a triad or worse dependency where they're not going to be able to access their information because A depends on B, depends on C, depends on A, like we talked about here. And then down here are the services and resources that you need to supply. You need to make sure you're collecting information, that you have your services and infrastructure and applications documented. Oh, you have to allocate people to do this stuff. Amazing. But if you don't have this part here, you're going to have problems going to your boss or whoever saying, I need another guy because we just can't get it all done. It's like, well, find a way. But if you have this set up, you have these allocations set up and this part set up, you can go to say, if you need another body, you can go do that. So governance is part of, you're already here, you're managing the risk and maintaining compliance, right? Through, go back there, this one. If you Google Colbet, this is one of the diagrams that'll come up, okay? And you can work off of that. So we had documented stuff, see? Most of the stuff was online, but we had paper lists. Some of it was 3, 4 years old, the applications. It was disorganized. It was in a couple of different notebooks. Some of them were kind of dog-eared because they'd been around for a while. Not well put together. It was incomplete. There was no continuity. Some of the people that actually had left the company already, but they were still set up as primary instigators for application support. So we had to sit back and figure out how we were going to put this all together because the incident manager was looking to close out the incident. And he said, I need to have some documentation that this isn't going to happen again, okay? So we had to go back. We had to inventory the systems. We actually put together a sequencing document for booting the systems. We documented the applications. We went to the developers group and said, what applications you got running on the servers? And we mentioned the incident manager's name when we did that. All of a sudden, we got all kinds of information coming out of the woodwork. People were telling us all kinds of stuff that they had running, and they'd actually moved an application from on-prem to part of it was being run by somebody's tower underneath their desk, right? And when it went back through our corporate site network, and when the power went off, our connectivity went off to the internet, right, our upstream, and so they lost connectivity. But they had done this, they didn't think anything about it. It runs, it sits underneath my desk, we got power all the time, we're good, right? So we had to rescope the environment, everything we had to do. So what did we have? We had process and practices. We had existing support model for the infrastructure, which we thought was pretty good. We actually had our support models documented. It was the best effort 5 by 8 next business day. Nobody told that to the people in the Philippines. That was, if they had an outage, it would be best effort next day. They thought we had 24/7 on-call support. So you could call and talk to somebody 24/7, but they were in Bangalore. So that was going to be an issue that they kind of didn't like. Single point of contact with incident logging. We had done that. That was kind of interesting to set that up, but all your servers go down, you kind of lose that, you don't understand what's going on in your environment. This existing support model, it didn't work, obviously, and the efforts were not focused or in sync with our business. We were research and development for software applications. What's your business? Well, it's kind of important to know who's got what running where, Okay, and we had not gone to the point to break down the identification of each of those applications and who the business was, quote unquote business was, that owned that application. So what do? We called and reported the business unit application, the database dev teams. We got everybody together, started documenting the process, putting controls around them, and documenting the sensitivity and hierarchy, who needed what from who, setting up the process activation notification for owner customer. So now what happens, we have applications that are running on the system. We bring the system up. If there's a problem with the application or database, we call the application or the database people, and they log in and figure out what's going on. You'd be surprised at the improvement in quality of the application startup and stopping and the database starting and stopping when this went into play. Because we got them and we'd get them up 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. We had to reboot the server and the database not coming up. So they'd have to get online. All of a sudden, all their procedures tightened up and the databases became a lot more robust in working with starts and stops. Touch points with all the business units, same thing with the applications. Now the applications were pretty happy about starting and stopping themselves. And we discussed the organizing, the touch points in those organizations, and guess who? Their vendors. Who are you dealing with? Who are you working with? And what's the need to have them understand what's going on with our process? So we documenting and publishing operating principles and strategies. Again, you go back to the diagram that I had up before. And publishing our scope, organizing and assigning assets to businesses. So now we're talking, if we have a system and there's an application running on it, we have a business unit tied to that. If there's 2 applications running on it, we tell both those business units, hey, you got somebody running on your server that's running your application. They're running one that's competing with you for CPU, memory, I/O on the network, and stuff like that. So now they go off in a room and they sort it out, and then somebody comes back and says, yeah, here's a check. We need to have our own server. Not our problem. That's okay with us. That's not an us problem. That's a them problem, right? And they had been complaining about performance. So the authority and appointment and review. So we put in a review cycle so that we went through. It got to the point where it was once a year. That was their budget cycle so they could deal with that. And we had escalation points and tripwires for business unit resources. The system started slowing down. If things got a little hinky, we weren't sure what's going on, we had contact points for this. So now we have the operating principles, contact points, personnel. We had paper and memory, but now what we have is we have documents that show us to go back to individuals so we can start working the systems. And now we start to get a rhythm in the environment, and the uptimes increase, the application performance increases, database performance increases, and we're working more as a cohesive unit. We have monthly meetings to discuss what's going on. Maybe kind of like a stand-up meeting like you would have now. But it was got to the be where they were very quick because everybody knew what was going on. So we started to dealing with the culture, ethics, and behavior, the attitude towards people that were pushing stuff out onto the server. We needed to work on communication, enforcing principles and practices and how they're deploying to the servers. We actually employed some incentives and rewards. Again, people would get little tchotchkes for their desks, said, oh, they did a good job because they didn't have any outages this quarter. People were more aware of what was going on, and we actually had some integration happen where we had some applications actually collapse into each other, which actually reduced our need for a digital footprint. And then we worked with champions to make sure that we moved that position back into the business unit so that they would collect the information, then they would come to us and say, this is what we need, this is what we're doing. Let's see. So communication that we had, that we started to improve the resources and documented contact points, support organizations were put together. We had contact phone numbers for people, not just a phone number at a desk, but a phone number to reach somebody if they needed to. We started to deploy at that time individual communication devices so we could contact people if we had an issue. And initially there was some pushback because nobody wanted to be able to get touched off hours. But over time, what happened is that fell off because they were spending more time testing interruptions and different problems that could occur with their applications before they were deployed. And so their interruptions got to be less frequent. We collected, we needed to define information and attributes, physical and empirical data that we were collecting, system footprints, physical relation to each other, different things like redundant power supplies, because we've been on the cheap for a long time, just buying single pole to save, maybe $100, $150 per server. And we realized that limited us because if we had to do any maintenance on that circuit in the server room, you're going to shut down all those servers. And there might be 3 here, 1 there, 2 over there, and a couple over there. So by going through and updating our systems in the process, we were able to mitigate stuff that was going on in the data center and eliminate problems that way. Different aspects of dealing with the systems, dealing with the people, being practical. This is as an interesting term that we found that took on a different phase when you were talking to different groups, because being pragmatic about something was different to different people depending on where their application fell in the stack or how important they felt. It did translate. It was interesting because it translated into dollars, so that had some effect on that. We were, in this place, we had legacy references, configuration information, legacy ownership and references, assignment of ownership based on scope, which wasn't necessarily really effective. And we went on to document and exercise the business unit and enterprise communication paths. So we actually sat down, we had tabletops with the business unit and said, we're going to go through this exercise. We're going to have some work, virtual work, that's going to be done in the environment, and we want to see how it's going to impact your system. So we'd have their systems tied together, and we'd be using a whiteboard or a smart board or something like that, and we'd say, we're going to take this system down. What's going to happen to your system? We knew what's going to go on physically with the system, and we had to tell them, this is what happened to the server. What's going to happen to your application? And then we'd do something really weird. We'd go test it. We'd say, okay, let's see what happens. And that was always fun because they're like, to relate back to Eugene's, his talk, one of the points this morning is like, if you don't really understand, it's not planned, it's kind of a surprise. And they weren't aware of the reaction that their application was going to have when the server did these certain things. So that was interesting. And then we started developing, this is something, a contingency plan, disaster recovery, that's ongoing. But that was kind of interesting because they hadn't really thought about that. Well, what happens if, the data center gets blown up? We did have, does anybody know what a halon system is? Okay. We had maintenance going in our data center. They had torn down the walls, and one of the fire alarm boxes, I remember seeing it walking by. There's an A-frame ladder there, and there's one guy I remember, I'm like, this guy shouldn't be in here working. He's a construction worker, and here's our firebox hanging from a wire from the ceiling that's connected to our halon system. It was going to cost us they said it was going to cost us about $1.2 million to replace it because of the hazardous material. We were grandfathered because it was there. So we couldn't do anything about it. We were grandfathered because it was there. So I'm looking around, watching what's going on, and we're like, okay, you guys are all set. I go back to my desk. My desk at that time was on top of the data center. And I just sat down, and I heard, boom. Type, nothing. And I walked down, and they're like, nobody can go in there. He had bumped the fire alarm box with his elbow, set off the halon system. So, well, the interesting thing is they had insurance, and now we didn't have to worry about replacing it. So there is those kind of things you walk around, it's like, geez, I wonder what would happen if the halon system went up. I wonder what would happen if we did have a power outage. Maybe you don't, and that's okay. But now you've asked the question, so you're kind of prepared for that craziness that can happen, okay? Let's see. Services, infrastructure, and applications. We defined some of this stuff. We had some service levels that we were working on. Reference to repository and architecture, target and transition. We only had head knowledge. There was a lot of legacy knowledge there was 5 of us that supported this environment. If I didn't know, Steve knew. If Steve didn't know, Dave knew, okay? We kind of had that going around, and we were all there, and we're gonna work here forever, right? Because that's what happens in the IT industry. You work one place forever. And so we didn't have to worry so much about that. There was no usability or application documentation we had. So we were working on that. We were putting that together and creating those documents into what was digital so that we could go out and send information off to the business unit. We had it in digital documentation form, so it was like on the web. That was replicated in a single document that we could send to them so we could document and trace our actions. And we also did something really arcane. We printed it out. And we had a place that was stored not in the server room for us to look at if we ever needed to have access to it. We identified service level, and we mapped enterprises and business unit objectives. It showed our current architecture. We actually had a diagram that showed, 2 diagrams that showed, one showed the physical architecture that came in, where the floors were, where the cables were run, and then we had a logical architecture. Another one which actually shows the application interface and working, and we presented those back to the business unit on a yearly basis. Is this still what's happening? Like, yeah, that's going on. Like, no, it's not like that anymore. So one of the things is everybody had a role. You do backups, you do authentication, you do storage allocation, you set up the cluster. And so we had this, it was all segmented. And what we needed is to have all that stuff put together. And it was all split up not only by us individually, but we had our favorite partners in the business units that we worked with. So what did we need to do? We needed to define the roles, right, and requirements at the enterprise level. And we had to go back to our boss and say, we need to find some training in some way to homogenize the education so that we all understand what's going on in the environment and so that we all have the ability. Some people would specialize, but at least you had an idea if you're dealing with application ABC, you know that interfaces with these other things. We got to get these guys together and maybe the business unit or the developers and start working on this. So we started training across the architectures because we did have guys that did Windows, we had guys that did not Windows, and some other things in between. So we needed to get those skills at least functional so that our team was better prepared to anticipate things like this. So that was like, slammed you through that, and talking probably 6 to 8 months after our initial start. And with the learning curve there is the framework that we're using was actually in its infancy. I think it was called at 4 at that time, now it's 5. And I think the date on it right now is 2019 is the last time it was published. But it's still effective. I've gone out and reviewed it, looked at it for the site I'm working at now, and it still has the validity because the part of it is you need to have your policies, procedures, and frameworks set up and put together so that you can work on the other parts of it to bring it into the point where you can manage it and you can govern it. Auditing, we found out, was not a passive process. Yeah, you do it once, you're okay. Oh, that's right. I was talking to Mike the other day, and he said that they were changing one of their applications. Here's a hallway conversation I overheard. So, but passive information may identify auditing needs. So you hear somebody talking about moving an application, maybe you want to have like an official meeting with a group and say, what are you guys doing? Understand the importance of asking what if and playing it out reasonably. Sometimes you have to be unreasonable. What about if the switch goes bad? What do I do? You don't have to worry about meteors or tidal waves, unless, of course, they're kind of in your purview. I think here we're pretty safe. The example of legacy systems operation was fine without a problem until performing maintenance. Again, I go back and say, what does a disaster look like? Just before it's a disaster, everything's just fine, right? So envision what does, review the missed milestones related to missed flags, you know? It's not a big deal, we've done it before. And I did want to make sure you understand it's a process that gets revisited. It's a process that you go through in sequence. And it's a process that you start over again and go back through. That's part of your procedures and policies that you need to go back and you tell your customers, this is great to know. I'm going to be back in 3 months. I'm going to be back in 6 months. I'm going to be back in a year. And we're going to go over this again. I recently published, we have a share that we manage, a NAS, and over the time I've encountered several people that said, well, who's supposed to have access to your information? I don't know, everybody that has access. So I showed them a list of people that had access to their share, and they were surprised. Well, that person left like a year ago. That person hasn't been here for 2 years. This is important. It had never been brought to their attention that these resources were still available to those people. So I'm hoping that this has been helpful to kind of take you back to your environment where you are and maybe kind of giving you a little uneasiness and the complacency of where we are when we document our environment so that we're all set. Maybe you need to go back and ask some of those questions. What about or what if when somebody's coming up and saying, we're going to do maintenance, we're going to do an install, we're going to do an upgrade, we're going to patch. You know, it's not going to be a big deal. Well, okay, it may not be. What happens if it is? So you really need to understand that. And I will take any questions. I know it went through fast, but I'd be willing to answer any questions if anybody has some, as long as I don't have to divulge where this was. They're not here in Rochester anymore, so it's okay. Anything? So everybody has their full implementation of framework to recover their systems. Yes? This is a good, see the thing is with guys that have been doing this for a while, you got a bajillion stories. That's a great one. Hot summer day here in Rochester, 98, 99 degrees. We got HVAC in our data center. No big deal, right? Come to find out, I get an alarm. I just happen to be on call that day. So I log in, bing, bing, nothing. Connect remotely, I'm not getting anything. So that means now I gotta go downtown, right? So I drive in, walk in, and I go to open the server door, and I can feel the heat radiating off the glass plate in the window for the server door. So I open the door, and I'm just overwhelmed by this huge, I look over at the HVAC units we got, they're all dashes. They went up to 99, okay? They didn't have 100, they just went dashes. So I'm in there, and I'm already sweating, I'm just inside the door. So I'm walking around opening, we had double hung windows in the data center. So I'm opening the windows top and down to try to get some of the heat up, because it was actually cooler outside than it was inside. The HVAC units had been blocked with dogwood down. And the maintenance guy, I call him in, and he says, you know, I was gonna look at that Friday, but I figured I'd just wait. So we had a full server room, all 200 servers had locked up, totally locked up. And so we got everything cooled down, took us 2 hours to get the HVAC units back running again. And then the cabinets had to cool down. So I think the internal temperature on a couple of the drives was, I want to say it was like 70 Celsius or 80 Celsius, okay? And the failure rate on them was like 100 Celsius, okay? So that's where we were with all these servers. And yeah, so snow, ice, what are your risks? You're looking around, what are you looking at? You have the internal risks, we've already talked about that, having the bad actor inside for one reason or another, whether it's a mistake. Courtney gave a talk a little bit a while ago this morning about mistakes and errors, right? You got those you're dealing with. How do you recover from that? And now you have this stuff. It's like, who would have thought? We've been doing this maintenance for years, no big deal. Just happened to be that the component that we're replacing is only supposed to last 10 years, and this one's 13. So, all right. Questions, comments? Yes. So the question depends on where do you put me on my cycle? Is it back when I was doing this stuff, or do you want to say today? So today, I'm smart enough to realize I can set up filters and I can get stuff. So I got warnings, I got alerts, I got errors, and so I start to do, granted homegrown, I'm back here, right? I'm kind of coming to today, right? So a lot of this stuff was homegrown. One of the things I found, and I don't know why I could never figure it out, if we were going to have a problem with the storage, it was usually in the morning. So one of the things I did was when I pulled my log for the day, I would invert the log. So I was looking at the last 4 to 6 hours first. I could never figure out if it was a backup or what was going on, but if we were going to have a storage failure, it was going to be in the first 2 or 3 hours before I got in the office. And I actually saved, so that we had the corporate data center was out in another state. And just because we had our stuff, I would scan our stuff, and I'd scan their stuff too. I'd just pull over the logs because I could, and I scanned their stuff, and I sent a note off to one of their sysadmins, and my boss, who was out there, said, you might want to look at this. You're getting, anybody see bread? Anybody see bread failures? B reads? It's a B read on a Unix disk, okay? It's an error. It's a bad thing. But I said, your system's making bread, kind of joking about it. And come to find out, the disk was going bad. They were able to pull the disk out of the pairing, replace it, and everything like that. And my boss said, all I got a note from him after they'd done it, it took like a day or so to figure it out, get it going. Got a note from my boss, said, good job. So anyways, so there's that. So scan, tailor your alerts, know what you're looking for. When you get that oddball one, right, make sure you hear that, right? You get that oddball one, you got to hear it. And then work backwards from there, all right? Fill out your surveys, comments. Feedback is a gift, I believe that. So if it was good, bad, indifferent, too many slides. I did Google, I'm supposed to only have 20 slides, I had 54, so sorry. All right? Thanks, you got 5 minutes back, go visit the vendors, and have a good day. Thank you.